Hello, I'm Dr. Hughes. Welcome to the case study video series. This is a series of videos to educate your staff on the case study program. They normally go in sequence from one protocol to the next, and I'm going to start with the first most vital activity or action that you can do on the program. And that's put somebody in charge of this department. First off, any organization in dentistry is really composed of four specific departments. You have an office manager at the top, of course, almost every office has one. And then the next department below that is the Department of Customer Service. That Department of Customer Service receives all the inbound calls and handles all the outbound calls. For example, for reactivation or ordering supplies or what have you. The next department is the Department of Finance, and that's your treatment coordinator, your insurance billing, and what have you. Very important department. The next department is the one we're focused on. It's called the Department of Hygiene. The Department of Hygiene, the most critical fact and factor of that department is having a retention coordinator over the top of it. You can also call it a hygiene coordinator. I'll get back to that in a moment as to what is the most critical aspect of having that person on post. Without that person there, it's almost impossible and extremely difficult to grow that department. The last department is the Department of Operative Dentistry, and of course that's the dentist and the assistants underneath him, as well as additional doctors if you have associates. That's the structure. We're focusing on the retention department or the Department of Hygiene. This department is by far the most critical department in your practice. You will always consume new patients. You'll always acquire them. However, if 90 to 95% of them are going out the back door, then your cost to acquire them stays there and the practice doesn't grow. We're trying to build the hygiene department, and that hygiene department comes about from having somebody responsible for every single consumer that walks in your front door so they don't go out the back door. Now, there's a protocol to doing that, and the first step, of course, is putting a retention coordinator on post and then training that person on a very simple protocol. The first step that she does is she actually begins with a hygiene production monitor, which I'm going to show here, that actually monitors the daily production of the hygienist. What is the average? Critical to know. The average hygiene production per day across the country as a benchmark averages around $1,500 a day. Well, that's pretty important to know. It doesn't mean that your hygienist every day is going to produce 1,500. Some days will be 1,155, other days will be 1,620, other days will be 920. The next day might be 1,855. It's an average over a week and a month time period. That's what we're trying to shoot as a target and a goal because it's the standard across the country. Now, that figure is a figure for a fee-for-service and PPO practice. If you have HMOs, Denti-Cal, Medi-Cal, that number changes quite drastically. So let's take that number as a benchmark. If you look at the hygiene production monitor, there's various things we're recording every day. So the first thing is to monitor the production of that department. It is a revenue center. It's a revenue center that can outproduce any single doctor in any practice across the United States. Now, let's take a look at what the retention coordinator focuses on. And let's take a look at where do you actually lose your patients? How do they leak out the back door? So let's take a look at it. This is actually a hidden, almost invisible influence that's occurring in most practices across the country. How does that occur? So I'm going to show you an appointment book. This has been done many times where we went into Dentrex or Eaglesoft and pulled up the appointments for 30 days, 60 days, and then 90 days back. And here's what we found. The average cancellation rate in the hygiene department across the country is 15 to 18% every day of hygiene. So if a hygienist is seeing an average of 8 patients a day, and there's a 15 to 18% cancellation, that means she has 1.5 to 2 cancellations every day. Well, in 4 days a week, which is what the average hygienist works, that's equivalent to around 5 to 7 patients that cancel every single week. Well, there's 4.3 weeks in a month, so do the math. 4.3 times 6 to 7 patients canceled every week is an average of 24 to 26 patients lost every week. Well, if you're only getting 25 patients a month, then the number coming in is going right back out the back door. So how do we lose them? And we've just identified the invisible influence. How come? When these patients cancel, there is, of course, somebody in the office or multiple people in the office that try to contact that patient to reschedule them or get them back in again. Well, that being said, just ask your office manager, ask your receptionist, ask your dental hygienist, or whoever is calling these patients that 8 out of 10 of those patients, they get a voicemail. And of course, this list gets longer and longer and longer, and pretty soon it becomes a reactivation list. The number of people recovered from cancellations is the key to stopping the leakage. So I'm going to show you here a bit of a statistic and how that occurs, and then what is the protocol for stopping that leakage. So if you have 5-7 patients a week that cancel from a single hygienist, let's take a look at how this protocol works. The next thing we want to cover is how do you record this and how do you staticize this as a measurement? Because unless you measure it, you can't see what your loss is versus what your gain is. It's actually quite simple. And that's simply the number of recovered cancellations every week and every month divided by the total number of cancellations in the hygiene department every week and every month. That gives you a percentage. It also gives you a number. And that number tells you how many you're losing or how many you're gaining. That is the key specific target, function, and responsibility of the hygiene coordinator or the retention coordinator, whatever you want to call her. Now, to recover these patients isn't going to occur if you keep doing what you're doing. How come? We've implemented and executed a series of 5 steps for every single canceled appointment. How does it work? So here's how it works. Number 1, when the patient cancels, the first step, step 1, is that the hygienist of record calls that patient. And when she calls that patient, it is in reference to the original mission statement given to that patient. Here's what the dialogue looks like. Step number 2 is done 24 hours later, and it's a text message, and it is only sent from the hygienist of record. It, of course, can be sent by the hygiene coordinator if you have an online texting service, and she can actually text in the name of the hygienist because the protocol and the dialogue is the same on the second step of the program. Once that step is done, the hygienist is done with that patient. Step 3, 4, and 5 is the responsibility of the hygiene coordinator. Step number 3 is a second call, which is made on day 3. And the second call refers to call number 1. Here's the dialogue on it. Step number 4, which is on day number 4, is now a text message that refers to text number 2 from the dental hygienist. Here's what that dialogue looks like. Step number 5 completes the 5 steps, at which point, when this step is done, they come off the list and they go into reactivation. The last step on step 5 is a letter. The letter is from the hygienist of record, but administratively is handled by the hygiene coordinator. Here's what the letter looks like, and here is how it's delivered to the patient. It's delivered in a plain envelope. It's always hand addressed, and it's hand addressed for a reason. The reason it's hand addressed is because it'll have a 100% open rate. And the inside of the copy that is written to the patient is again in reference to call number 1, text number 1, call number 2, text number 2, and the overall mission statement of the office, which is a wellness program to keep them healthy and have them return for their hygiene visit. Those are pretty simple steps. In the next lesson, I'm going to expand on the concept of what we just covered so we can take a look at why is that patient canceling. We're going to talk about the mission statement, when a patient comes back into the hygiene department, how does she reduce the cancellations with a cancellation dialogue? That's the next video. We'll see you then. That comes next month. Can't wait to see you.